At this point, you might be thinking, boy, Trump really has it out for Canada. A new tax, a tariff on all steel and aluminum imports.
We're doing a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum.
Yes, this would affect all countries. But you know who this hits the hardest? Canada is the leading exporter of steel to the United States, responsible for about 1/5 of all U.S. steel imports, worth around $8-9 billion US last year. And here's aluminum. Again, Canada is the top exporter to the US, and it's not even close. It sends the US more aluminum every year than every other country combined. But the US has tried this before.
When it comes to a time when our country can't make aluminum and steel, you almost don't have much of a country.
It slapped a tax on steel and aluminum imports in 2018 during Trump's first term. And you know what happened? The price of cars went up. All that aluminum in cans drove up the price of soft drinks and beer too. And appliances across the board, they all became more expensive. So why try this again? It's telling that the earliest praise we saw for Trump's new plan to tax foreign steel and aluminum came from American producers. The American Iron and Steel Institute, which represents steelworkers across the US, welcomes President Trump's continued commitment to a strong American steel industry, which is essential to America's national security and economic prosperity. Let's pick up on that last part. National security was the legal basis for putting a 25% tariff on steel back in 2018.
We need great steel makers, great aluminum makers for defense.
The idea being, just think of all the things that require steel and aluminum in the first place. Military vehicles, weapons, critical infrastructure, renewable energy. These all rely on steel and or aluminum that the US can't produce enough of domestically. So it counts on the rest of the world selling it what it needs. That's maybe a dangerous spot to be in, but there was also a business case.
I don't think it ever had anything to do with making America safer. It had to do, in his mind, with making America's steel industry stronger. And he used those national emergency measures simply as a justification to impose the tariffs.
The World Steel Association has a pretty good representation of the top steel producers in the world. And that huge circle in Asia, that's China. No country produces as much steel as China. And China sells steel all over the world at artificially low prices, say critics and Trump himself.
Back in 2018, he felt that there was foreign steel and aluminum being dumped into the United States. Dumped means that they're selling it for less in the United States than they're selling it in their home market.
China's cheap steel has an impact on the price of all steel globally. And Trump would argue this hurts American producers.
The Americans don't like that. They want to keep steel prices high to support American steel producers in America. And the way to do that, they say, is to put up these tariffs on everybody. And Canada sort of gets caught in the crossfire of that.
Problem is, if Trump wants to revitalize American steel, it has a long way to go. This is what the industry looks like, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. The gray shaded columns, those are US recessions. But overall, over the last 50 plus years, US raw steel production has cratered. The industry is no longer the production powerhouse it once was. There are lots of reasons for this.
If you look back at what the American economy was doing in the 80s and the 90s and the 70s, they were building a ton of stuff and they needed a ton of steel to do that. And now, the economy is much more technologically based, and we're not building these giant, enormous, colossal warehouses anymore.
China is the biggest producer of steel in the world, but Canadian and U.S. steel companies really have not kept up with the technology and not made the capital investments required.
And ultimately, when Trump did impose a 25% tax on steel imports in 2018, the whole exercise just didn't last very long. Look again at all the zigs and zags of US domestic steel production. We can zoom right into March 2018, when Trump's tariffs first went into effect, and we can see a small spike. Steel imports went way down during this period, by the way, and American producers did try to pick up the slack. But before even the end of the calendar year, US production started sinking again. And we started to see headlines like this as the industry was faced with the problem that made it uncompetitive in the first place. It just costs more to make steel in the US. Otherwise, they wouldn't import it for cheaper. Demand and production fell.
As the price went up, they just couldn't bear the cost. So they started laying people off. Then they went to the White House and said, we can't continue like this. This is going to cost American jobs. The people that were most severely punished by those tariffs weren't Canadian steel producers. It was American buyers of Canadian steel.
Ultimately, Trump removed tariffs on Canadian steel, its #1 importer, by May 2019. The tariffs barely lasted a year.
The revocation of the tariffs back in 2018-19 was really a sign that this was not well conceived in the first place. Whatever he thought he was going to accomplish, it didn't get accomplished.
Fast forward to today, US steel production right now is actually lower than it was in 2017 pre-tariffs. Aluminum production, almost 10% less. Meanwhile, when you make things like steel and aluminum more expensive, lots of other things become more expensive too. It's hard to overstate just how wide-reaching the impact is when you increase the cost of a basic building block like steel or aluminum. Consider just the military applications: warships, submarines, tanks, fighter jets, guns, shells, missile casings. Or think about construction: bridges, highways, transmission towers, power lines, railways, pipelines, solar panels, wind turbines. All of these things become more expensive when steel and aluminum become more expensive. To the point where, in some cases, the US Federal Reserve Board found that any benefits of increased import protection are offset by increases in costs. And if you want to see how that math translates to reality, consider how the Peterson Institute for International Economics crunched those numbers. It figured Trump's first round of steel tariffs in 2018 would create 8,700 jobs in steel, raising revenues by $2.4 billion in 2018, but increasing costs for everyone who uses steel by about $5.6 billion. Cost per job, 650 grand. That's where you likely would have felt the pinch, with cars and trucks, construction, and appliances all becoming more expensive.
You're driving up the cost of the end product, whether that's cans of beer or appliances or cars or car parts. All of those things get more expensive as a result. And we saw that happen in 2018. We're expecting, if this goes ahead, we'll see it happen this time. It is simple economics.
So the big question right now is why? Why impose roughly the same tariffs on steel and aluminum Trump already tried to impose 7 years ago, knowing now how that story ended? Is this about applying maximum pressure on Canada?
The steel industry in Canada employs close to 25,000 people. I think it would have a devastating impact on the Canadian steel industry.
Tariffs at 25% going into one of our main markets will be devastating, and we really can't let this happen.
Or is this about revitalizing American industry?
Industrial policy plays large with a lot of America's competitors. So unless you have a long-term vision and money behind it, it's going to be difficult to turn it around.
Tariffs and trade protection are very inefficient. They create supply chain disruptions and constrain the flow of goods and services through the supply chain.
Or is this about correcting a global market?
China makes more steel than basically everybody else combined. They sell that steel at very cheap rates around the world. That drives down the price of steel for everybody else.
Whatever the answer, this is one of Trump's plans, which we've actually seen before. It's already been tried. Whether it worked is a whole other story.